carol on, it's 4 o'clock. So it's time to get started. And I'm just super excited that you guys are all here. It's so fun. And I just want to go over some things while we wait for our special guest to join us. And maybe some more people can join us, but it's just so fun to be with you all this way. And I just want to thank you for spending your Friday afternoon with us. And I hope you're having plan to have a great weekend. So what I wanted to do is just give you a little bit of background about the this book club, and that we had intended to do a book club for some time now, and we had really kind of pictured it coming through our Sewanee Club system, so that maybe the Sewanee Club of Atlanta could all get together around a book club, and the Sewanee Club of Nashville, and so on. But I really sort of like that way it has turned out, so that we can just all be together like this. So like I said, this is the very first one, and the way we're doing it is through a Facebook group right now, because we need to know who wants to be part of the book club. And so that was a way, and I pictured that we would have some discussion in the group, and I just really didn't prompt that this time, but we will going forward. And there were a handful of people who, for some reason or another, do not do Facebook. There were fewer than 10. So we just kind of kept a separate list so we would alert them on how to join us tonight. So I hope they are with us too. So each time that we get together, we will have an author, I hope most of the times, or it could just be an expert about the book who can sort of be the authority on what we're discussing. So what we'll do is we'll have them just give a quick overview, and then we'll open it up for discussion and questions, and just like you would in a book club. And so if you look down below, there's a Q&A button. And so when you have questions, if you just put them there, then I will ask them well, tonight it'll be to Kevin. And so I think that's all I have as far as the rules go for how this will operate tonight. But I'm excited to get started. I hope you all loved the book. I just really, really did. And when we wanted to launch this book club idea, I just wanted to have a home run for the very first one. And I didn't have to think very long about which book I wanted to start with. And so when I asked Kevin if he would participate, he was just so generous. And he said, well, sure, I'll do that. And it didn't matter what day, time, he just was so flexible and willing to join us. So I know you're going to enjoy hearing from him. But I want to tell you a little bit about him. He is on the faculty here at Sewanee. He is a professor in the English department, and he's also the director of the Creative Writing Certificate program there. And this book that we read this time is his 5th book, I believe, and it is a New York Times bestseller. When I was trying to describe how awesome he is, so here, just for this book alone, now his other books have gotten notoriety as well, but he was listed in the New York Times top notable books for 2019. People called this book the 10 best books on their list. Audible listed it as the top 5 in their fiction category. Entertainment Weekly called it one of their 10 best. Time called it one of their must-reads for the year. The Washington Post listed it as 50 notable works, and I don't know what's wrong with them, why it wasn't top 10, but we'll take 50. And, of course, he's been on the Today Show where I shared that post on the Facebook group. But the book, I think, I don't know if it was immediately before this one, but The Family Fang, if you haven't read that, that's just as entertaining. And it was adapted to a film. And you all may know that, but Jason Bateman and Nicole Kidman starred in that film. And we all think that we'll be able to see the film version of Nothing to See Here. So I told you all those kind of reviews, but I also had some other reviews I wanted to share with you. As I said, he's a professor, and there's this website called Rate My Professor, and I just wanted to share a few of those. He does get an overall score of 4.9 out of 5, but they just were heartwarming because most of you here tonight joining us were Sewanee students at one time, and you just know that relationship with your professors. And I think you'll enjoy hearing what they have to say, to know that those relationships are still in place. I absolutely love Professor Wilson. I was so afraid about having to take English, so I waited until my second semester of my senior year. Taking English with him was one of the best decisions I ever made during my Sewanee career. Wonderful discussions, beautiful writer, helpful and constructive comments. Absolutely my favorite professor. He's so wonderful, funny, cool, and interesting, and I have loved my classes with him. I am terrible at English and writing, but I love this class, and it was capital letters. Professor Wilson is so helpful. He makes reading and discussing fun. He is just really good at what he does. Take his classes if you have the chance. And they just go on and on like that. So I know that after you hear from him, you're going to understand what the students are talking about. But he lives here in Sewanee with his wife, Leanne, who's a Sewanee grad, and she's a award-winning poet herself. And they have 2 children, Griff and Patch, and we're just so glad they're here. But I see that Kevin's joined us, and I am going to turn it over to Kevin. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, yeah, thanks for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Well, I can start just talking a little bit about the book, like how it came to be, and then I'm happy to answer the questions that pop up, Susan, as they come.
Fantastic, fantastic.
So kind of, the thing that I say about this book is that it started out of being a parent, right? So when I was really young, though, I'd always kind of struggled with mental instability and always kind of had these issues of anxiety, and there was this kind of agitation always inside of me. And when I was probably around 7 or 8, I read like a Time Life Mysteries of the Unknown, and I learned about spontaneous human combustion, and it just immediately burrowed into my imagination, and I thought about it all the time, what that would be like to just burst into flames. And as a kid, it's scary a little bit because there's no rhyme or reason for why it might happen, right? But then as I became a teenager, I kind of wanted that to happen. Like I wished that I could burst into flames because I thought, 1, it would keep people away from me when I needed my own time, but 2, I thought it would burn out the anxiety. Like if I could just catch on fire, I'd be kind of clean and ready to go again. And so it's just always been in my head. And then after actually I came to teach, I started working at Sewanee in 2005. Probably the year after that, I got diagnosed with Tourette's. And that was helpful, like to know. And it helped speak to that agitation inside of me, why I always felt like I might burst into flames. Okay, so that's that original thing. So, okay, I'm good. I know how to take care of myself if I feel like I'm going to burst into flames. But then I had kids, right? And one of those things is that you pass on this genetic material to your children, and you shape them in the way that you raise them and how you love them and how you take care of them. And as I watched my 2 boys, Griff and Patch, grow up, that became the primary concern, right? Is I know how to take care of myself if I burst into flames, but how do you take care of someone you love when they might burst into flames? And I couldn't quite figure that answer out. So I wrote this novel the same way that Lillian makes that list of here's all the different things she'll do to try to protect those kids, that's the list that I made. You know, I was just like, how do we protect the people that we love? And the book just kind of came out of that, and I just followed Lillian and those children to the end of the story.
Wow, thank you for that background. And I meant to do this before we started, but I wanted to just, I'm sure everybody here read the book as they were probably did their homework as a student. But I just wanted to give a summary of the book just so people, you know, if they read it a long time ago or maybe haven't quite finished it. So here we go. Lillian and Madison were unlikely roommates and yet inseparable friends at their elite boarding school. But then Lillian had to leave the school unexpectedly in the wake of a scandal, and they've barely spoken since. Until now, when Lillian gets a letter from Madison pleading for her help. Madison's twin stepkids are moving in with her family, and she wants Lillian to be their caretaker. However, there's a catch. The twins spontaneously combust when they get agitated, flames igniting from their skin in a startling but beautiful way. Lillian is convinced Madison is pulling her leg, but it's the truth. So that's the premise of the book, and we have several questions, but can I ask one first? It's not that important, but why did you make them twins?
So I think one of it was just, you know, there's always technical stuff like why as a writer do you tell the story that you tell, and just technically it was easier to explain that they were born at the same time, right? So I didn't have to account for that Jasper and his wife had two kids at two different times. I like that you know, these two unexpected kids, but also, you know, the weirdness of twins, I wanted to tap into that. There's always this kind of mythology around twins that they have like a secret language, that they share these traits. And what I wanted to get at is one of our closest friends is a poet, and she has two daughters, identical twins, Calla and June. And one of the things that I love so much about observing them is the way that they shift their personalities with each other in different situations, and the way they kind of accommodate each other. And I love that kind of closeness. And so I wanted that with Roland and Bessie, that these two twin kids would kind of know the different ways to take care of each other. Yeah, so I went with twins.
Great. Okay, Frank asks, why is this story in first person?
So my first two novels were both third person, so this authorial perspective, my voice, right? And I always, third person's really great. I love writing in it. I can control it. But for first person, sometimes what you can get out of first person is the electricity of that character's voice. And like one of the just like obvious things is Huck Finn and Mark Twain, right? Like that Huckleberry Finn's voice allows Twain to do stuff that he couldn't if he was telling the story. And so when I started thinking about this narrative, Lillian's voice popped into my head, and I knew she could tell the story in a way that I couldn't. She is more dynamic. And then the big thing was she could curse, right? Like as an authorial voice, I couldn't really do that. And so I wanted Lillian to be able to tell the story in her own specific weird way. And so once I tapped into that voice and heard Lillian, it was just kind of like transcribing. You're just following her voice to the end of the narrative.
Right. How many chili peppers, asks Lindsay.
What is that in reference to?
She doesn't say. Let's see. Okay, here's one. I read the book and then listened to it on Audible. I really enjoyed the narrator. Did you have any say-so on who was chosen to read it?
Oh, so I love audiobooks. I listen to them all the time. When my sons and I go on walks, I have my audiobook, and my son Griff has his audiobook, and we listen to them. And one of the cool things was with Nothing to See Here, the publisher will send you a list of maybe 4 narrators, and they ask you to kind of listen to some of their previous books, and you choose. And for this one, it was Marin Ireland, who is an actress from Sneaky Pete, Homeland. Like I love her work, and she's a stage actress who's done a Tennessee Williams play in New York. And I just thought, oh my God, if I could have Marin Ireland read this book, it would be incredible. And I was just lucky enough that she did. And I have never listened to the audio versions of my book, but for this one, my son Griff wanted to read the book, and I thought, oh, let's listen to it. And hearing her read it was just such an incredible experience. She brought so much to the narrative that not even I put on the page. It's the way that she reads it, and I really think her the way that she kind of gets at the accents of every character is really lovely and wonderful. And I've since we have stayed in touch and talk a lot, and I just it's just writing a book in so many ways is this solitary activity, right? You write it alone and you send it out into the world, and it's this little flare, and sometimes nobody sees it, and sometimes you get lucky and it connects with another person. And one of the kind of lucky things about this book for me is that I got to know this actress, Marin, and connect with her. And it's just this neat way, again, that this book helps me kind of reach out to the larger world.
Thank you. Somebody has asked, I'm struck with both Perfect Little World and Nothing to See Here have elected officials as characters. What inspired those choices?
Oh, well, I mean, so with Nothing to See Here, which I'll just in case, because I can't imagine making somebody read more than one of my books, but I'll stick with Nothing to See Here. And I knew pretty quickly I wanted to write about privilege, and I wanted to write about the South. And so one of the things that I quickly thought of is just politics, right? And so Jasper is this Democrat, this lineage of a political family. And I wanted to write a little bit about the way Jasper is in some ways a public servant, but also incredibly wealthy, incredibly privileged, right? And so I wanted to write a little bit about the weirdness of that, and the way kind of privilege can affect the way we look at the world around us. So I knew pretty quickly, because the other thing was that one of the other main characters, Madison, who Lillian's best friend, Madison at the very beginning of the book wants to be president of the United States, right? And being a woman, in some ways she feels that her options are limited. So the next best thing is to be married to the president. So she kind of hitches her wagon to Jasper, who's on the fast track to possibly becoming president.
That's great background. The character of Madison feels rather like some of the students with whom I went to Sewanee. Where did you draw your inspiration from for both Madison and Lillian?
Well, I mean, the thing that I kind of loved about both of those characters is that they both come from incredibly different backgrounds, right? Like Madison is the daughter of this incredibly rich, wealthy department store owner in Georgia, and Lillian comes from nothing. And so, and yet, despite those incredibly different backgrounds, they have this kind of connection because of how weird they are, how strange they are. And so I wanted two very different characters, and yet to speak to the way in which sometimes we have to hide that weirdness, right, in order to kind of make it through the world, and the safety of having somebody else who can see us the way other people can't. And so I knew that's kind of what I wanted. For Madison feeling like a Sewanee student, I mean, I think one of the things that I grew up in the valley of this county. I grew up in Winchester, Tennessee. I went to Franklin County High School. My wife went to the University of the South. My uncle graduated from the University of the South. I'm familiar, and I knew this place coming into it. And then when I moved from the valley into the top of the mountain, one of the things that really struck me is, you know, there's this idea of privilege at this university. And yet one of the things that also really resonated with me and why I love teaching here so much is there is that privilege. There's no doubt there are people that come from privilege, but there's also like incredibly interesting, weird, strange students that want to be in this beautiful location, in this remote place to experience and figure out who they are. And so to my mind, Madison and Lillian both could thrive and find their way in a place like Sewanee, right? It's available to them.
Okay, here's a good one. How do you get inside of a woman's perspective? Do you find it a different process than telling things from a man's?
It's a question that I have to probably I ask myself. I have to think about it, because one of the things is that all three of my novels, to my mind, the main characters are all women. So, like, why do I keep returning to this female perspective? And so there's an easy answer to that, which is that I like to write in the voice of, or in the perspective of, a woman, because it gives me a little bit of distance between myself and the character. And it also helps me hide, like, so that people don't assume that I'm the character, right? It gives me a little bit of distance and I can play with that. And that's really nice. But the other thing is just, most of my friends are women. Most of the people that I grew up with and who kind of influenced me were women. And so it's a voice, and it's something that I feel comfortable with. And it's also just one of those things that I try to get right. Like, I want to write slightly outside of myself and see if I can do it. And I know there are things I'm going to get wrong, but there are things that I get wrong about being a man, So that's the thing, is when you write outside yourself, you run the risk of getting it wrong, right? But to my mind, if I can figure out what that character desires, what's inside of them, what they want, then I hope the reader will give me the benefit of the doubt, right? And let me kind of move with those characters. But I don't know. And the next book that I'm writing is narrated by a female character. So it just feels natural to me.
Great. Here's one from Stephen Sanford. What significance did the priority of public life of the parents have in the uniqueness of the children?
And well, so one of the things, that the book is set in the mid 90s, and the number one reason for that was because I didn't want to write in a time period when things can go viral, right? Like when we're being watched so clearly, when our public persona is mixed up with our private lives. And so I love the comfort of writing in that time period, which is when I grew up. But to this larger issue of Jasper, he's a politician. He's an incredibly public figure. And so these twins who burst into flames, one of the things that I wanted to write about with it is, it's not so much that like what's wrong with them medically, can we cure them? It's more like, how is this going to make me look as a parent or as a public official? And I really wanted to just kind of play with that, the way that we have this public persona and we have this private persona, and what happens when those two things really start to bleed together. And the twins are the ultimate way. Like, if they burst into flames, it's going to be very hard to keep that private. It's going to be very hard to keep that out of your public persona. So that would add drama to the narrative, right? Like, if Jasper's not running for president, he doesn't want to be Secretary of State, it's not as much of a problem. I mean, it's probably a problem that your kids burst into flames, but not as big of a problem.
Well, and you might have touched on this a little bit from that scenario, but where did the title come from?
So I've written 5 books, and I've never, every book has been with Echo, my publisher, and they have never picked the title that I gave them. So every book has been not my title. And so this book, the whole time when I wrote it, was called Children on Fire. So I turned it in to the publisher, and they were like, there's just no way we can call a book Children on Fire. And so we went back to the drawing board, and I was like, well, maybe we could call it Children Made of Fire. And they were like, no, like, it doesn't matter what comes in between. Like, the word children and fire on the cover is a problem. So we went back and forth, and my agent and my editor and I, we spent probably a week trying to figure it out. And finally, my agent is Julie Baer, who I love, and her husband is Colson Whitehead, who just won his 2nd Pulitzer Prize. He's the novelist. And she was telling Colson, we're having trouble with figuring out a title for Kevin's book. And he thought about it for like 5 minutes and was like, you should call it Nothing to See Here. And everybody loved it. So Colson Whitehead came up with the title for my book.
I love that. Lacey wants to know, did you always know that Madison and Jasper's son would also combust, or did that develop as you wrote?
No, I knew. The way that I write a lot of times is, I, you know, I have kids. I teach full time. Writing is something that I can't do every day, and so I save it. I save it for when I have that time. And so when I'm not in front of the computer writing, what I'm doing is just writing that story in my head. You know, just all the time. It's looping in my head. And so I've been writing this story for like a year and a half, just figuring out every plot point that I wanted to kind of deal with. And from the get-go, I knew that Timothy was going to burst into flames. I just knew I was going to have that. And the main reason was just I wanted it to be clear that, like, even though Jasper doesn't burst into flames, I mean, it's his genetics. I mean, he's responsible. As much as he hates this and as much as he feels persecuted and ruined by his family, I mean, it's him. You know, it's him, and he can't deny it now that both sets of his kids burst in flames.
Okay, Kevin, have you envisioned how the twins might evolve as they grow up? Maybe having the ability to control their combustion more or not? What do you think happens to them as adults?
Yeah, it's hard to, I mean, so as a storyteller, like, one of the things that you always think about is that there's really, like, every story, if you take it far enough, is a sad story, because every life ends with death, right? So, like, so that happy ending is really just, when do you cut off the narrative? And so for me, I feel like I cut the story off in a moment where it's a happy ending. It's a happy ending for these characters, and I wanted that. But that doesn't mean that as the story goes on, there aren't going to be these moments where things fall apart. And to my mind, those kids, those twins, it's not like it goes away. It's not like you're fine and you're cured. And that's one of the things that I really wanted to write about. And I don't want to be heavy-handed with metaphor, but kids bursting into flames in a lot of ways is just writing about disability. And so many people, they want to cure things, right? Like, they want it to just go away, and that's not possible. You know, that's just not the way that the world works. And what I want to figure out is, how do you live with it? And one of the things that I thought about with this book was, like a month before the book came out, I got an email from a guy who had seen me at a reading, and I had talked about these tics and unwanted thoughts. And he was like, in Minnesota, I'm working with this doctor, and we're doing this study where we're trying to help people get rid of those tics and unwanted thoughts, and we'd like you to participate. And it was really kind and really generous. But I never wrote back. And part of it was, like, I'm 41 and I've lived with whatever is in my head for that long. I don't know what I would do if it went away. And I don't want it to go away at this point, because I don't know who I'd be. And with those children, they burst into flames. And there's a moment where Bessie says, you know, I don't want it to go. How would I protect myself if I didn't have it? And I get that. The thing that people think of as disability is the thing that makes me who I am. And I'm not interested in losing it. I'm interested in learning how to live the most full life that I can. And so I think Lillian, her job is to help those kids figure out how to live a life that they can have what they want while still having this thing inside of them that makes them combust.
I love that. Here's a good one that we haven't talked about these people yet, but the relationship between Lillian and Carl, the fixing guy, is a great source of humor. But their camaraderie in their dealings with Jasper and Madison on one hand, and with Bessie and Roland on the other, is endearing. Is there anything to see here?
So when I knew that Lillian was going to take care of these kids, and Lillian, in her own words, is kind of a disaster, right? So I knew that I needed somebody that was going to try to create order, and that was going to be Carl. And when I first started thinking about Carl, and when he picks her up in that Miata, and has like a kind of officious tone, kind of like a cop, and Carl's a square, you know? And so, because the story is Lillian's voice, when I first met Carl, I was like, God, this guy. But then once I started writing him, I realized what I could do is I could get this kind of Abbott and Costello routine going between him and Lillian. And that opened up the book for me to watch them kind of uh, fight with each other, play with each other. And then just like anything, like one of the things about writing is it doesn't mean that like people aren't flawed, and it doesn't mean that people aren't capable of doing horrible things. But one of the things that writing helps you understand is that the longer you can spend with that character, the longer you can watch them, the more you can understand who they are. You start to sympathize with them. You start to understand them. And so Carl opened up for me, and I was like, oh, he's not so bad, right? Like it's not like Lillian wants to be his best friend, but by the end of the story, she gets him, right? And I think sometimes that's all we want, is just to get somebody, to figure them out. And so Carl's a square, but he's not awful.
You had mentioned that it's set in the mid-90s. And Lindsay's asking, why would you choose that time frame? She said as she was reading, she thought it was present day, and then she realized it wasn't.
I write most of my stuff in the mid-90s because it's when I grew up. It's the world, and I don't know, I think I'm kind of stunted a lot of times and emotionally, and so I don't really understand the modern world all that well. I also just like writing stories where people don't have cell phones or easy access to information. Like, I like the mystery of when I grew up, you know, and there's a lot of stuff with this book that I just don't think I could do if it was set in present time. And so I just knew I wanted a little bit of a kind of closed off narrative, and the mid-90s made sense to me.
There's a couple comments here. Several people are not liking Madison,
Mm-hmm.
and see her as a user, and that maybe they thought she would kind of get hers at the end, and that just really didn't happen, and wondered if that was on purpose.
I think Madison, it's weird. I love her because I wrote the book from Lillian's perspective, and Lillian loves her. So I just gave myself over to her, even though I know she does horrible stuff, and I know that she's really problematic and difficult, and she doesn't really get her comeuppance at the end. And in fact, you know, she offers Lillian, you know, this opportunity at the end with these kids, but at the same time, you know, she's solving her own problem, right? So it's complicated. But one of the things that I wanted to write about with Madison and Lillian is like, I think a lot of times we think friendships are equal, like they're completely balanced, and I don't think that's always true. I think sometimes there's a power imbalance in friendships, a weird dynamic, and sometimes I think we're okay with that because we like the feeling that we get when we're with that person, and we're willing to accept that imbalance. And so that's what I wanted to do with Lillian, is that Madison's difficult, she's problematic, she's not 100% nice, but the way Lillian feels around her is worth it, right? And there's a moment where Madison's like, I always do the right thing, it just takes me longer than most people. And that's what I finally came around to on Madison, is that if you give her 100 years, she'll be a good person.
That's great. Okay, so Lillian's bond with the twins, we've got a couple of questions about that.
Oh, let me turn my light on.
Okay. But you know, so how do you explain their bond, and how she was able to kind of reach them when others couldn't? Does it have anything to do with her background?
Yeah, so I really wanted, so one of the big things was that I didn't want to write a book where it's like, hey, you should have kids and everything will be better and you'll be a better person, because that's just not true. And I didn't want it to be like motherhood or fatherhood is ultimately the way that we become better people. That's also not true, I don't think. And so I wanted these to not be Lillian's kids, because my first two books in so many ways are about parenting and being children and the dynamics of a nuclear family. And with this book, I wanted to open that up a little bit, to look at how do we move beyond that nuclear family. And for Lillian, the reason that she can reach these children is because she's had a difficult life, and she's vulnerable. And this is I don't know. I don't I feel weird, like I feel weird talking about this a little bit because it's not like I know anything, but to my mind, a lot of times there's this sentiment that like the strong protect the weak, and like in a perfect world, that's how it should be. But I don't know that I really believe that. I don't know that the strong always protect the weak, and I think sometimes the strong will do it if it's in their best interest or if they feel like it. But a lot of times, I think people in really high positions of privilege and power are a little bit disgusted by vulnerability or weakness. They don't want it to touch them. And that's Madison and Jasper, right? They don't want these kids to infect them, to ruin them. They don't understand what it would be like to be vulnerable. And so they build this wall, right? They put them in this house all by themselves and they separate themselves. And Lillian is that person like, okay, if the strong don't protect the weak, then how do we save people? And it's in this narrative, it's the weak take care of the weaker. In some ways, the weak figure out some measure of strength to protect the people that really need it. And that's what Lillian does. Like everybody else is building walls to protect themselves from the fire, and Lillian walks into it. And there's times where you have to walk into the fire if you're going to save somebody else. And to my mind, that's parenting, right? Is that parenting is you make yourself vulnerable to protect the people that you love, knowing that you might hurt them and knowing that they might hurt you, but knowing that's what you have to do. So yeah, Lillian, that's what she wants. She wants to make sure these kids aren't forgotten in the way that she was.
Someone mentions that a theme through many of your books is empathy, and she compares it to George Saunders. Have you been influenced by George Saunders?
Yeah, I'm 100% influenced by Saunders. I was, as an undergrad, my junior year, his first book, Civil War Land in Bad Decline, came out. And what I loved about Saunders was that he could use these magical elements, these really wild, strange premises, but at the heart of it, there was something really human. So like, for instance, if he writes about the inescapability of poverty in a story like Sea Oak, which I teach here at the university in my beginning fiction workshop, you know, he has a zombie. He has this aunt come back from the dead and she becomes this kind of oracle. But at the heart of it, really what Saunders is trying to talk about is like, how do you get out of the situation that you're in? How impossible is it to find a life beyond what you were born with? And I love that because I don't feel like I'm an authority. I don't feel I can write that like big question novel or great American novel. I come at things from a weird angle, and Saunders showed me how to do that. And you know, Saunders at the heart of it is just such an unbelievably empathetic author for his characters, and I wanted to mimic that. I always, a professor of mine, Walter Sullivan, I was an undergrad, and all these workshops, like characters would die. You know, everybody was dying because that's like the ultimate ending. And he just said, you know, he was like, he was in his 80s at the time. He was just so tired of reading these stories, I think. And he was just like, you know, if you ask your characters, most of the time, they'll tell you that they want to live. And he's like, can you figure out a way for them to live? And that's what I always think about with Saunders is it doesn't mean a happy ending. It doesn't mean that the character isn't in pain, but can you find a way to keep them alive and get them to that next stage? And watching Saunders do that, I knew that's what I wanted to try to do too.
Thank you. There's several questions about Mary, and we haven't talked about her character and, you know, her relationship. How do you think she felt for the twins? And also, did she really have a purpose like we knew Carl did?
I mean, with Mary, what I wanted was just somebody who so easily fits into the role that's given to her, right? Her job is to maintain order, to help these privileged people have the life that they want, and she's incredibly skilled at it. And one of the ways that she's done that is to tamp down her emotions, right? And in the way that Lillian cannot. And yet, what I wanted to do with Mary is to also show how aware she is of everyone and how in little small ways she can approximate power over people, right? She's just the cook, but there's so many times when she appears in the book, to my mind, that she's the most powerful person in the story. And I just wanted to play with that a little bit. And also, I never wanted to lose track of the fact that even though Lillian is Madison's best friend, Carl, Mary, Lillian, they're all employees. They all work for them, right? And so one of those things, like, you know, like when you work in a job and a new person comes in, you want to be kind, but also in your head, you're like, how much extra work is this person going to make for me? Like, how are their disasters going to rub off on me? Can I handle this person? And that's what Mary's trying to figure out with Lillian, is how much more difficult are you going to make the easy job that I've made for myself? And so that's that weird coldness that she has. But, you know, she's a minor character, but I liked writing her because she's a lot of fun.
Great, great. Okay, so Becca's asking, she says the reviews of the book frequently say hilarious, laugh out loud, funny. But to her, it didn't strike her as funny. It was weird, heartbreaking, beautiful, perhaps, but not really funny, because it deals with the seriousness of privilege and the trauma of a difficult childhood. What do you think about the reviews that describe the book as funny?
Well, I mean, this is one of the things that I try really hard is that I do want it to be funny. I want there to be some humor in it. And because I am the person that I am, it's hard for me to come out with the darkness immediately. So the way that I try to get my reader into the narrative is to make it seem light, to make it seem a little silly, right? And then if I can get the reader in, if I can make them feel like, this is funny, there's some silliness here, there's kids bursting into flames, but they don't get hurt, that if I can pull you in with lightness, then gradually, little by little, I can turn that light down, right? And it's different than if I start with complete darkness. If I can just dim it, little by little, you realize how dark the story becomes, and then you're in it, right? You're kind of stuck. And so that's kind of how I've always written, is I start silly and slowly try to get a little more serious as I move on until I can hit something that matters to me. But I still want it to be funny, but it's hard to write funny stuff about some of the things that happen in this book. But Lillian's voice is what lets me do that. Lillian's kind of sarcastic. She's got a defense mechanism to pretend like she doesn't care about anything. So she can be funny even if the material might not be.
Right. I'm trying to scan through these questions. There seem to be a lot of them related to the setting, and maybe they saw some similarities to the mountain or the school or the small town. Can you talk about that?
Ever since I've been writing, from my very first book that came out in 2009, I was writing those stories in college. Most of my stories are set in a town called Coalfield, which is fictional. It's not real. And in my head, so like the family and the family Fang live in the same town as Lillian, where she grew up. And that's just not really possible. But I love the comfort of going back to this place. And to my mind, Coalfield is like, it changes, it grows and gets smaller to accommodate characters. But sometimes Coalfield is a mountain and a valley. And then sometimes I'll just push that mountain down so that they're flat. But there's like a liberal arts school next to a town. It just kind of changes in my imagination. But yeah, when I write, like, I haven't lived outside of this county. I've lived in this county almost my entire life. So when I write, this is the place that I know. It's the place that I feel most comfortable. So I write about the valley and the mountain. So parts of those real worlds are going to bleed into these stories.
That's fun. That's really fun. Okay, Blair is asking, she says, it's fascinating that you considered fire to be cleansing, very much like a routine forest fire cleans out the underbrush. We always think of a fire as being destructive, so I love your imagery in that regard. The premise of the story is seemingly unbelievable, but you were able to make me swallow it whole. What literary tool or trick did you use to achieve that and do it so well?
Well, that's really kind. And I mean, that's the danger always of the kind of stories that I write, where there's this weirdness and you gotta figure out a way for the reader to get on board. And so for me, I grew up, you know, I wasn't reading literature when I was a teenager. I was reading comic books, and I love them. And one of the things that I loved is like when you read a comic book, on the very first panel, somebody's shooting lasers out of their eyes, somebody's flying. And if you can't accept that, you're not going to enjoy the story. Like, you can't turn the page. So you just have to, from that very first page, give yourself over to that world and say, I'm going to live in it. And so, and then I started reading, and writers like George Saunders or Amy Bender. Amy Bender is this really incredible writer, and I teach her a lot with my students too. Almost every story of hers begins with an opening line that's immediate. Like, my lover is experiencing reverse evolution, right? There's always this immediate hook, and if you can do it really quickly, and you don't give the reader time to kind of think about it, you can generally pull them along. And so I just try to be really upfront. Here's the weirdness. You got to accept it. Let's move forward. And then the other thing that I like to do, which is kind of what Saunders does, is like, the fire is really the only magical thing in the book. Like, there's nothing else that's weird. And what I generally tend to do is, if you take a house and you turn it on its side, everything falls down, right? Everybody knows that the world has changed. But if you can just tilt the house a little bit, like, I don't know, 8 degrees, like, you're walking and something feels strange, but you can't quite put your finger on it. And so that's what I try to write, stories where you just tilt the world a little bit. You can get that weirdness, but not so much that you feel like you're in a world that's not the world we live in. And I don't know, that's just, maybe my brain is just tilted, and that's just how I write. But that's the easiest thing for me to do.
Oh gosh, okay, here's one. I work in the mental health field and found the combusting into flames to be like an expression of authenticity and uniqueness. So something supposedly negative or stigmatized was actually remarkable. Am I on track here?
Sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, again, like, what I'm trying to figure out is like I said, I'm not interested in curing myself. I'm interested in learning how to live the life that I have. And for so many other people too, I think there's this issue of like believing that this kind of aspect of yourself that seems strange or negative is the thing that's going to ruin your life. And I don't know. So with this book, I wanted those children bursting into flames. It's beautiful to me, and it's the thing that makes me kind of love them. And that's how I think about the larger world. I don't know. I don't think that that's unique. It's just, I, I always like, I think people sometimes get weirded out where I feel a little damaged sometimes, but that doesn't mean that I don't function. It means that there are elements of me that work differently, but I'm not broken. I still function. I still work. And that's what I wanted with those kids is, I don't think about things being broken. I think about like, how do we live with the damage that's been done to us?
Sort of along those lines, um, Leisha is asking, can you tell us more about the doctor and what he talked about when he talked about paranormal religious reasons for the kid's condition? And did that represent a larger meaning?
I mean, with the doctor, one, I just wanted a kind of kooky Orville Redenbacher looking doctor. I just thought it would be fun. And I knew that they couldn't take him to a real doctor, so they take him to this retired, discreet country doctor. So he was fun for me to write. But the two things that he lands on is either you are blessed by God or you're a demon. Like, these are the two options. And what I really wanted that scene for was for an adult, an authority figure, to tell these children, this is what you probably are, so that Lillian in the aftermath could say, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Like, don't listen to him. Like, you're not that. You're not a demon. So that there could be this moment where Lillian proves to the kids that she'll take care of them. She'll tell them and help them figure out who they are, right? Like, don't listen to the crazy doctor. I know who you are. I've been with you, and you're not that.
Great. So we're back to Lillian and Madison's relationship. And did you ever root for Lillian to tell Madison to shove it? And maybe the complicated relationship makes the story really work. And this person really loved the book. And I love this comment. She loved the imagery of the twins giving off their heat at night while sleeping with Lillian, and how aware she became of their internal fire.
Yeah, I mean, I think about that too, like those things that are inside of me, that are inside of all of us, it's not like they disappear. They're always there. And so, I don't know, there's moments with my kids where we're like sitting in bed and we're reading, or we're going on a walk. And a lot of times, like when all of us, our family, are on a walk, like we're not touching, but I know what's inside of all of us, right? I can feel it as we move. And so, I don't know, I like that feeling. And to me, that's what family is that you recognize those things are inside of somebody else, and they're always there. But the complication of Lillian and Madison, again, like, because I was trying to put myself as much as possible into Lillian's perspective, I didn't want her to say shove it to Madison, because I was just always hoping that maybe it would work out. You know, maybe that Madison of her own volition would apologize, would realize what she'd done, the damage, you know. So as much as it would be nice for Lillian to tell her to shove it, I just couldn't find my way to that. The balance of power in that relationship just wouldn't let me do that. So yeah, it's always going to be, I've had just so many people tell me different things about how they look at that relationship between those two characters. And I kind of can see all of them. They all make sense to me.
Yeah, someone else did ask, was that relationship more than platonic? We know it was really more than, not evenly.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this is the thing, is that so much of the book, like the reviews and the copy, is about this friendship. And it is a friendship, but I think it's also romantic. I think Lillian is in love with Madison. I think she loves her. I think she would like to marry Madison. Um, and so that's one of the things I'm trying to write about, is that I don't think Lillian, in a lot of ways, and it's also maybe why I wanted to set it in the mid-90s too, is that I don't think Lillian really has the language to know who she is. Like, she's never had the opportunity to think about who she is, or who she loves, or why she feels the way she feels. So it's hard for her to put it into words. And I think Madison's aware of it, and I think people go back and forth on whether it's reciprocated, but it's a friendship. They're friends, but Lillian's in love with her.
Mhm. Oh, now I didn't say this on the front end, but we're trying to wrap this up in an hour, because I just want to really respect your time. I'm so grateful you're here, but there's a few more questions I want to touch on. Susan asks, I love that the title first appears during a conversation in a library, and I hope that was intentional. And if so, are you a great fan of libraries?
So yeah, I am, yes. And I think uh, I'm anxious a lot in public. I don't really enjoy being out in the world. It's scary to me, and it always has been. And one of the things about having a family is that they push you out into the world more and more, right? I have to interact more than I ever would, and that's good, but it's also a little terrifying. And yet, the places where I've always felt comfortable my whole life have been libraries and bookstores. When I walk into those spaces, it's partly the quiet, it's partly the fact that there are just so many books that you can read. It's calming to me to be in those spaces. And so for those kids, I wanted them to walk into the library and realize, like, all of this in this room, you can read it. And just kind of, as solitary and isolated as their life is, a library, no matter where you live, and I grew up here in Franklin County, like, I know about tiny little libraries that don't have much money, and yet it was my window into the world. It's how I connected. So yeah, I love those places.
I'm just going to do a couple more questions. Elizabeth loved the book. She loved the scene when Bessie demonstrates that she can sometimes tap into her darker emotions. but can control her reactions and use them to her advantage when she moves the fire to her hand. Was this what you were trying to portray, or am I overanalyzing?
No, I think this is the moment, right, where Bessie's trying to show that, like, as chaotic and difficult and problematic as this fire is, like, in some rare moments she can control it, and in controlling it she knows who she is. And yeah, I mean, I think that's how we live with ourselves. That's how we figure out how to keep going in this world and not disappear. So yeah, I think that's right. That's what I wanted, at least.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up with this last question. What about a sequel?
It would be, it's hard because you write these characters into existence, and on some level you feel like you need to take care of them, you need to protect them. Like I wanted to get them somewhere safe. And one of the things about a sequel is that you'd have to dream up an entirely new conflict. I'd have to put them in harm's way, and I'd have to figure out if it would ruin them. And that scares me. I like thinking about them in this moment of them walking down the street, bouncing that basketball, the whole world open to them. That's good. I'm happy, right? And I can think about where it would go, but I'm a little scared to put myself and the characters through it again.
Great. Well, maybe we'll look forward to the movie. Tell us a little bit about the screenwriting. You're going to direct it, is that right?
No. It's just, you know, those things are, everything really is, so much of what I've learned with writing and stuff, it's just kind of dumb luck. Like you have to be maybe kind of good, but after that, it's just, you get lucky. And so with this book, when it came out, almost as soon as it was published, there was an auction for the film rights, and a woman, Elizabeth Gabler, who's with Sony, bought the rights, and it felt like winning the lottery. And so hopefully there'll be a movie that almost immediately attached. And again, but as soon as the rights were sold, it was attached, it was packaged with these two screenwriters, Michael Weber and I can't remember, but they've done all the John Green adaptations, like The Fault in Her Stars. They wrote 500 Days of Summer and The Disaster Artist, but they're really well known for doing literary adaptations. And so they were attached, they took the book, they've written a screenplay, and now, because of the uncertainty in Hollywood of when anything will happen, it's just kind of in a holding pattern. And if it happens, it will be great. And if it doesn't, that's okay too. But I'd kind of love to see what it looks like, how you make those kids burst into flames on film and not be terrifying.
Yes. Well, I think I speak on behalf of everyone here tonight that we just have enjoyed being with you, and from Sewanee's perspective, we're just really proud of you and what you've done. And for this first book discussion, to have, I feel like, a very uplifting feeling. Like, I think I'm going to walk away feeling great with these themes of love, acceptance, and parenting, and how vulnerable you really were with us tonight. It's just been really, really uplifting. And I just want to thank you for that.
And thank you, Susan, and thank you for everything that you do for the university. And one of the things that it is difficult for me sometimes in this world, but Sewanee, those lines of connection that Sewanee makes and ensures, the way that we all feel like we're a part of something larger than ourselves, has been so helpful for me. And then just one little quick thing I want to say is, like, I've been here since 2005, and I've had the opportunity to teach a lot of students. And one of the things that's made me so happy is talking about writing and watching these students take those things that are inside of them and put it down on paper and find that part of themselves that they can really see clearly. And when I teach writing, so much of it is, I want them to become better writers, but I really want them to interrogate, like, who are you? What do you want? Like, what do you care about? And that's what I think of as the Sewanee experience is, you will learn, right? You'll learn how to do things, you'll acquire skills, but at the heart of it, what we want is for you to figure out the person that you want to be, so that when you leave Sewanee, you're on that road to realizing this is who I am. And I've just been really lucky to be at Sewanee, where, you know, I don't know a lot of other schools, and I don't want to say like Sewanee students are the smartest students or they're the best students, but Sewanee students, to my mind, are always their game. Like, they'll try it, right? And they're willing to fail. I'm like, write this weird story. And rarely does a Sewanee student say, oh, I can't, I don't know if I can do that. They're always like, sure, I'll try it, you know, and if I mess it up, we'll figure it out. And that's really heartened me, and made me feel kind of really enthusiastic about being here in this place. So I appreciate it, and thanks for letting me talk to everybody.
Well, you've just been a gift to all of us tonight, and we appreciate it so much. Thank you for being here.
Thanks.
For the rest of you all, we will we have our second book club discussion lined up, and it's going to be John Reichman is going to lead the discussion on a book called The Secret Agent. And so we'll be sending out details about that. But I really, really want your feedback on how to make these better for you all. It's hard to top Kevin Wilson, but just if you have any tips or any suggestions, I really want to hear them. So thank you guys so much for being here. And we will stay in touch through the book club group on Facebook. And y'all have a great weekend.